Second Samuel chapter 24. There's kind of this weird story about David where he goes out and takes a census. And it almost seems to me, at least the first time I read it through, like God is sitting up in heaven and just trying to cause problems for David because he felt like it. This is, I think, a great chapter of scripture for someone to use that's agnostic or atheist that wants to accuse God of not being loving but being harsh, wants to accuse God of someone that sits up in the throne room of heaven and just strikes down us whenever we mess up for any reason. But I don't think that's how we should approach this passage of scripture. Think of someone in your life right now that you really admire, someone of integrity. Maybe for me, it would be my pastor at my church. If someone came up to me after church on Sunday and said, "Logan, your pastor, he's out selling drugs behind the church," I would look at them and laugh. I would say, there's no way that man is doing that. And I think that's how we should approach the Bible. When we say, "Jesus, you saved my soul. Jesus, I love you so much. Jesus, I want to serve you with my life." But then someone brings up one passage of scripture, you're like, "Oh, wow. Jesus, do you actually?" When we can begin to doubt everything just based off of one small section of scripture, I don't think that's good for our hearts and our faith. Instead, we should look at it of saying, "Lord, I know who you are because I've read a lot of your word. Help me discern what you're trying to teach me in this passage of scripture." So let's jump in and talk about this passage in particular. It says in 2 Samuel 24:1, "Once again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he caused David to harm them by taking a census." So David goes out and he takes a census. Joab, his military official, advises against it, and then God gets mad at him for taking the census. But it almost seems like, God, you're mad at David, so you cause him to do something that you don't want him to do. He goes out and does it, and then you get mad and you punish him. To me and you, I would say that seems unjust, but I don't think we're understanding the story fully. I'm reading through the Bible in a year right now, but I'm doing it chronologically. So a good thing for me is that in the book of Chronicles, we actually see a different version of this story. In Chronicles 21:1, it says, "Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel." You see, there's this translation problem in the Hebrew, where in the first verse of 2 Samuel chapter 24, I'm reading out of the NLT, but in the ESV, the NIV, the KJV, they all say, "Once again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel." That's pretty congruent between all of them. And then it says he, lowercase he, so it wouldn't be God. And then it's not going to be David because it says his name just a couple words later. So that he there in the New American Standard Version, it says it's referring to Satan. Whenever I first realized that, I was like, oh, Satan caused David to stumble. So what happened? The Lord then punished David's sin. Because while we are not condemned for our sin, meaning we're not going to hell for our sin, there's still consequences to every sin that we commit. And those consequences vary based off the sins that we commit. If you do something that's really, really bad, sometimes you go to jail. That's a big consequence for your sin. If you steal a gum wrapper, there's not as big of consequences for that, but all sin condemns us to hell. So God punishes David. David chooses to be punished by a plague that's going to last 3 days, and 70,000 people of Israel die for David's sin. Why? Why does this happen? Well, just like in the book of Job, we don't really get an answer from God at all, but we can make some assumptions just based off the text. Number one, I think that here's some ideas of why God might have done it. Now remember, God doesn't have to justify his actions at all. He's God. We're just humans. So that's a thing that for me, whenever I'm realizing that, I just have to humble my heart. Sometimes God's not going to explain certain things. But he could have done it because we get punished for the sins of our leaders. That's why in James it discourages people to be leaders because they're going to be judged harder. So the nation was punished for the sins of their leader. Another reason it could have come from is that Israel is a pretty sinful nation. It goes up and down. So maybe the people were also sinning and God wanted to use this to punish them too for their sin. We really don't know. But what I love about David and his heart is what we see at the end of our reading today in Psalm 130, is that even when all of this happens, I think many of us would be mad at God. But here's what David says. Psalm 130, verse 5, "For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning." I think David knew that he was supposed to be punished for his sin because that would draw him closer to God. And so when we're dealing with struggles in our life, realize the same thing that David realized. You have turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning and turned them into joy. I hope to see you back here tomorrow. Be sure to hit subscribe. If you want to read the Bible with me this year, then there's a video playlist in the description of this video, as well as the Bible plan that I'm actually reading. So I'll see you back here tomorrow as we continue to go through Scripture together.